Over the last few weeks, there's been a noticeable shift in the narrative surrounding the AI bubble. Whereas for most of 2023 and 2024, it was all about get your hands on as many of these NVIDIA GPUs as humanly possible. Now the narrative is shifted to, okay, we have these GPUs, now how the heck are we going to power them? You see, every single one of these GPUs uses as much electricity as a family of four. And when you consider that some of these data centers that are being built have tens or even hundreds of thousands of these GPUs in them, you're talking about every data center represents the combined power demands of a small city. Now, besides token lip service to renewable energy, most of the narrative has been that nuclear energy will rise to meet this new demand. And while I'm a firm believer that nuclear power is by far the safest and among the cleanest forms of energy available to us, the fact is there is one massive obstacle standing between these data centers and new nuclear reactors to power them, and that is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The NRC is an independent regulatory body that is not very susceptible to political influences and highly resistant to change. And in order for these new nuclear reactors to get built, the NRC would have to expedite their review process, and it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. And so as electricity prices are already starting to climb due to this data center build out, where are we going to get this new electricity supply from? Well, the same place we've gotten most of our new electricity supply from for the last 20 years, natural gas. What's up, guys? I'm nobody special, and one of the biggest clues about this shifting of priorities within the AI bubble came from some very contradictory press releases out of Microsoft on January 3rd of this year. Now, here was the first one. Microsoft expects to spend $80 billion on AI-enabled data centers in fiscal 2025. Now, this press release looks a lot like many of the press releases we've gotten over the last few years. Billions and billions of CapEx, more GPUs. Of course, semiconductor stocks rallied on this news. But on the very same day as that CapEx headline, we got this one in data center dynamics. Microsoft pauses construction on part of data center site in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin. Now, this article didn't get nearly as much airtime as that announcement of the $80 billion in CapEx, but it's every bit as important. In a statement to Wisconsin Public Radio, which first reported the news, Microsoft said, "We have paused early construction work for this second phase while we evaluate scope and recent changes in technology and consider how this might impact the design of our facilities." Now, these two headlines seem to totally contradict each other. Microsoft says we want to spend $80 billion more on data centers, and at the same time, they say we're scaling back our plans for data centers. So what's going on here? Well, it turns out Microsoft has already told us what's going on in this article back in December, which again suspiciously got very little airtime in financial press. NVIDIA stock's correction has accelerated since Microsoft CEOs hinted the frenzied demand for AI chips may be waning. In an interview with Bill Gurley and Brad Gerstner of the B2 podcast, Nadella signaled that the AI chip demand frenzy may be waning. When asked if Microsoft will still be supply constrained in its build out of AI technologies, Nadella responded, "I am power constrained, yes. I'm not chip supply constrained." And that little soundbite there perfectly explains these two contradictory headlines from Microsoft on the same day. Microsoft's big problem now isn't building enough data centers or buying enough chips. Microsoft is running into power problems. These data centers already lose money, and with power prices rising, those losses are going to get even bigger. So before Microsoft builds out even more data centers, they better solve their power problem first. Now, Microsoft is the biggest of all of the hyperscalers in this AI bubble. They've been building more data centers and buying more GPUs than pretty much anybody. Only Facebook, Google, and Amazon come close. But it's a good bet if Microsoft is feeling those power supply constraints, then those other hyperscalers are as well. Now, Microsoft famously made headlines back in September with this deal with Constellation Energy to restart the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. TMI was closed down several years ago because of falling power demand. Now owner Constellation is going to try to restart the plant and sell the power directly to Microsoft. Now that's a limited solution because 3 Mile Island was a perfectly good nuclear plant that was sitting there turned off. It's still going to be very expensive to get that reactor restarted, and there are open questions on things like steam generators and main transformers that could still torpedo this project, but that's a limited solution there. There's only so many of these reactors that can be restarted or uprated or have the license extended. If nuclear power is really going to expand enough to meet the demands of these AI data centers, then they're going to need these small modular reactors to be approved by the NRC. Now, there's a lot of people out there making claims about small modular reactors that they're going to be built by 2027 or 2030. The fact is, the NRC is dragging their feet on the approval process for these reactors, and there is no reasonable expectation that they would change anytime soon. Take this article from just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, for example. A lawless NRC obstructs safe nuclear power. Now, this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal was written by two guys from something called the Abundance Institute, and they're taking the NRC to court to try to get them to speed up the review process of these small modular reactors. It's a lawsuit that I don't think has very much chance in court, but it does draw attention to the fact that the NRC is a massive obstacle here. Building any new commercial reactor in the US has become almost impossible. Only 3 have been built in 28 years, all behind schedule and over budget. Small modular reactors could safely provide power for growing communities, businesses, and others, yet the NRC is stifling this progress. The licensing process alone can take up to 9 years. Small modular reactor company NuScale spent more than $500 million just to get its design certification approved by the NRC, a process that took more than 2 million hours of labor and required millions of pages of information. NuScale still needs to apply for its license, which will multiply these costs. And that's a perfect example here of how the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is totally stifling the industry. NuScale was the only company to receive design certification. As they're saying here, $500 million, millions of man-hours, and millions of pages of paperwork just to get that design cert. And of course, that licensing process ran so long and so over budget that those cost overruns forced NuScale to abandon their only reactor that was planned. And so as it stands right now, there are currently no plans for any small modular reactors anywhere in the country for a reactor design that has already been certified by the NRC. Now, it must have been leaked to the NRC that op-ed in the Wall Street Journal was coming yesterday, because on the same day we got this one in Bloomberg, where the NRC is trying to defend themselves. U.S. nuclear regulator pursues more efficient reactor approvals. Now, this article is very heavy on talking points and has virtually no substance in it whatsoever. The NRC chairman is basically saying, don't worry, guys, it's taking us millions of hours and millions of pages to do pretty much nothing. But once we get that first one built, everything after that is going to come much quicker. That's a promise we've been hearing from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for pretty much the last 20 years, and it's gone nowhere. And rather than entertaining the idea of making any changes or speeding things up, the NRC has actually spent most of their energy defending how long it's taking them. Take this article in Utility Dive back from March of 2023, for example. NRC chair defends reactor licensing changes. We are in the middle of the rulemaking process, not the end. The chairman is saying here, guys, get comfy. We're going nowhere fast. This is how we do things, and we're not going to speed it up. The head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on Tuesday defended the agency's efforts to update licensing regulations for advanced reactors and small modular reactors. Critics say the licensing process is slow, and the NRC staff's draft proposed rules to update the process at more than 1,200 pages is excessively lengthy and overly complicated. Let's be clear, we are in the middle of the rulemaking process, not at the end, Hansen said. Does that sound like a regulator who has seen the error of his ways and is ready to speed things up in order to accommodate this technology? Almost certainly not. Now, a lot of folks have pointed to the incoming Trump administration as being more pro-nuclear and saying that's going to make these changes at the NRC and that's going to speed up reactor approvals. While I would love to see that, the fact is it's probably not going to happen. Many have pointed to the appointment of Chris Wright as the Secretary of Energy. Chris Wright is the CEO of Liberty Energy, and he also sits on the board of directors at Oklo, a nuclear startup that's trying to build SMRs. But keep in mind, guys, that the NRC is not part of the Department of Energy. Chris Wright will have no sway over the NRC whatsoever. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is an independent regulatory body. They're not part of any other government department. No cabinet minister has any authority over them. NRC commissioners are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And if you look at the current makeup, the 5 NRC commissioners, only 2 of them are up for reappointment in the next 2 years. And both of them have been appointed by Republican presidents, which means they're typically the more pro-nuclear. There's not going to be any big shift in the political makeup of the NRC commissioners anytime soon. And Donald Trump does not have the authority to fire them. He can appoint a different chairman, but he can't fire them, which means the people who are making the rules in nuclear, we're stuck with them for the next couple of years at least. So as much as I believe in nuclear technology, as much as I want to see small modular reactors get approved and built in this country, the fact is there is no reasonable expectation of change in the NRC anytime soon, and without that change, those reactors will not happen in time to power this AI bubble. Which begs the question, where is the power going to come from? Well, for that, let's go back in time, say 24, 25 years. Let's look at this chart of the makeup of our electricity supply since the turn of the century. Shout out to wolfstreet.com who put this chart together using Energy Information Administration data. Now, a couple of things I want to point out here. You notice the black line, that's coal. As a percentage of our electrical generation, coal has been in rapid decline for pretty much the last 20 years. Coal probably not going to come back in time to power these data centers. Now, other than that, you've got nuclear in green. That number has been pretty much flat. It's actually declined a little bit because, yes, we've built some new reactors down south and we finished the Watts Bar reactor in Tennessee, but we've also lost some reactors like the one I used to work at in 3 Mile Island, which is hopefully coming back pretty soon. But nuclear power doesn't really move. This chart speaks to the pace at which nuclear power moves, which is pretty much the speed of continental drift. Now, the only 2 lines besides coal that have changed have been the red line, that's renewables. Now, we've been subsidizing the hell out of renewables this whole time. Donald Trump's probably not going to continue doing that, so it's not reasonable to expect renewables to do anything here. And it's also not reasonable to expect these data centers to run on renewables unless they plan on turning them off when the wind isn't blowing. Now that leaves that blue line there, which is natural gas. Natural gas has by far been the fastest growing energy source in the United States. That's been helped by the fracking boom. And of course, natural gas plants don't have to deal with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so they're the only power supply that realistically can be rapidly built. And even natural gas doesn't come without its problems. Even though it's the only power supply we can realistically expect to make any difference in the current regulatory regime, even natural gas is running into their problems. We had this one just yesterday in Bloomberg. Gas power won't provide an easy fix for the AI boom. Developers of new generation capacity in the US face soaring costs and long wait times for turbines. One of the biggest energy stories of the last year was the challenge of powering the artificial intelligence boom. Tech companies are putting serious money behind renewables and nuclear on the assumption electricity consumption will soar, but in the immediate future, natural gas is expected to meet the lion's share of additional demand. The industry rule of thumb is that combined cycle gas turbine technology costs about $1 billion per gigawatt to build, an estimate that's become severely outdated. The next wave of these workhorses, which can provide power around the clock and help back up renewables, will require about $1.5 to $2 billion per gigawatt, said Julian Dumoulin-Smith, an analyst at Jefferies. Now, let me just point out here that natural gas doesn't really back up renewables. That's been the talking point in the industry, that we're building renewable power and natural gas is the backup. Well, when your backup is running 80% of the time, because renewables only work about 20% of the time, it's not really your backup. That's your primary. Renewables are just way too intermittent to ever power these data centers. And so any talking points about renewables here is really just trying to placate the environmentalists. Everybody knows this stuff's going to come from gas. But that's beside the point here. This analyst at Jefferies is saying, look, guys, even natural gas is not immune to the inflation we've dealt with the last couple of years. And because we're currently building out natural gas at such a rapid pace, the price of these turbines has virtually doubled in the last couple of years. Inflation has driven up bills for turbines, labor, and construction, but it's not just bills rising. Waiting times are also blowing out to about 3 years for 200 megawatt turbines, according to recent Siemens Energy AG estimates. GE Verona is booking orders for 2028 and beyond. This power cycle is going to be longer and more protracted and likely higher priced than ever, said Dumoulin-Smith. You have to be sober about what's going to be done. And by the way, good luck with those calls for sobriety about what's going to get done. This is the market that gave us Fartcoin after all. And it turns out even the nuclear operators can read this writing on the wall. Take the case of yesterday, Constellation Energy nears $30 billion deal for Calpine. Constellation Energy is one of the biggest operators of nuclear power plants in the United States. They're also the same company that cut that deal with Microsoft to restart 3 Mile Island. And here they are yesterday, rumored to be spending $30 billion to buy Calpine Energy. Now, Calpine is a privately owned company that operates almost exclusively natural gas plants in Texas, the Northeast, and California. Even nuclear operator Constellation is ramping up their natural gas footprint in order to meet these AI power demands. So long story short, 2025 is going to be a totally different ballgame when it comes to this AI mania, this AI bubble. It's no longer get your hands on as many GPUs as possible. Now, who knows what that means for the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ, because semiconductors have by far been the leaders in this market. But now it's more about power. And despite all these talking points about renewables, and in particular nuclear, the regulatory regime in nuclear power is absolutely suffocating. And due to the nature of the NRC and the way it's made up and the way those commissioners are appointed, it's not reasonable to expect a change of that anytime soon, certainly not before all these data centers are going to get built. And that leaves only natural gas as the viable option to meet these power demands. Even that's running into problems. The waiting time for turbines is going up, and the price of those turbines is going up. After 2.5 years of this AI mania, we are long overdue for a reality check for these data centers that don't make money, for these AI companies that also don't make money. And the only people who do make money were the people building the chips. And we've seen from Microsoft, they're probably not going to buy as many of those chips now. So people are starting to ask questions. Till next time, live small and dream big.